In 1879, a woman in the quiet English village of Bolio began to feel an unsettling movement inside her body. It wasn't a child. It wasn't a sickness. It was something alive, something that had no right to be there. For 7 months, her belly grew. Her appetite became monstrous. And when doctors finally cut her open, what they discovered would change the way the entire town viewed water, food, and the very nature of the human body. This is the true clinical record of Agatha Alfred, a woman unknowingly feeding the creature living within her. Step into the shadows where the line between medicine and madness blurs. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and turn on the bell so you never miss the next story that should have stayed buried. Bolio village lay in its habitual silence, the kind particular to rural Hampshire, not the silence of peace but of long habit. It was midsummer and the air hung heavy inside the Alfred cottage, pressing the curtains against the walls. At 37, Agatha kept the same routine each night, closing the shutters, checking the lock on the door, folding her shawl over the chair, and setting the earthen pitcher of well water beside the small iron-framed bed she shared with her husband Alfred. The hour had long passed midnight when Agatha awoke with a dryness in her throat. The lamp had gone out, and the room was so dark that she could only trace the faint outline of the dresser and the shadowed form of her husband asleep. Reaching for the clay pitcher by touch, she felt the cool surface against her palm. It was then that she heard it, a faint sound, not the soft lap of stillness, but a movement, a barely perceptible slosh. She took no notice. Her thirst was greater than her caution. Raising the rim to her lips, she drank. The water slid down quickly, metallic and stale from sitting uncovered. Then a sharp sting at the back of her throat. She coughed and set the pitcher down with a muted clink, her palm lingering against the damp clay. Nothing unusual, she told herself. The wells of Bolio often contained grit. She had heard neighbors speak of spitting up tiny pebbles when the bucket rope frayed. She swallowed twice more to clear the sensation, which subsided, leaving only a thin line of heat under her ribs. Agatha lay back down, adjusting her cotton nightdress and waiting for sleep. The faint smell of damp earth rose from the pitcher, a familiar scent from years of fetching water at dawn. Outside, the faint drumming of insects filled the night. She thought briefly of her daughter asleep in the next room, then of Alfred, whose breathing came in steady, untroubled waves beside her. Nothing, she reassured herself, could be wrong. Just a simple irritation, perhaps dust. The human body, as she had heard one doctor say at the parish meeting, was a machine of mysterious humors. In the morning she felt a faint soreness in her throat and a mild burning along the right side of her chest. She said nothing of it. When Alfred asked why she was slow to rise, she smiled and claimed she had swallowed badly. He laughed, remarking that she was becoming delicate, like the London women he read about in the papers. The day passed uneventfully. She swept the yard, baked bread, and hung linens to dry. The ache behind her ribs pulsed once in the afternoon sun, but quickly vanished. There was work to be done, and the body, she believed, had its ways of correcting itself. That night, as she prepared for bed again, she refilled the same pitcher from the backyard well. The rope squealed against the wooden wheel, and murky water came up. She strained it through muslin, as she always did, and set it by the bedside, careful not to wake Alfred, who had already drifted into sleep. Before extinguishing the lamp, she looked briefly at the pitcher, its rim darkened by moisture, the faint shimmer of water catching the last glint of light. The room fell silent. Then came the sound, a soft, deliberate slosh, though no one had touched it. Agatha paused, her hands still over the lamp's wick, listening. The sound came again, faint, wet, and quick, and then nothing. She waited a moment longer, said a quiet prayer out of habit, and lay down. The pitcher remained still in the dark, but long after she closed her eyes, the faint smell of damp earth lingered in the air. By the 3rd week after the incident with the pitcher, Agatha began to experience what she later described as a motion within. It was not sharp nor constant, merely a subtle stirring beneath the skin of her lower abdomen, as though a pulse had shifted from its proper place. The sensation was mild initially and came at irregular hours, most often after she had eaten. She dismissed it as indigestion, a common ailment among women of her age who managed housework and took their meals late. In Bolio village, medicine was an improvised practice, a blend of household remedies and superstition. For fatigue, one drank warm vinegar. For dizziness, vinegar with salt. And for abdominal fluttering, women were told to rest and think pleasant thoughts. The midwife, Mrs. Elkins, was called discreetly one morning when Agatha's discomfort became visible. After a brief examination through the stays of her dress, the woman smiled faintly and whispered that it could be a late blessing. At 37, such occurrences were rare but not unheard of. Agatha said little in response. She did not feel pregnant. She felt inhabited. Her appetite grew without reason. Meals that once sustained her barely quelled the hollow ache inside. She would linger at the table, her spoon hovering, her expression fixed in thought. Alfred began to notice her habit of pressing her hand lightly against her stomach after every meal. "You worry too much about what's natural," he told her. A doctor would charge a week's wages to say the same thing. "You've taken too much bread and too little air," yet at night, when the lamps were lowered and the cottage silent, she would feel the same deliberate movement, faint at first, then rhythmic, pressing upward beneath her ribs. She placed her palm flat against her abdomen, tracing the motion as if to locate its source. It was not random. It came in waves, but turns, particularly after she had eaten. Within the village, whispers began. Mrs. Elkins mentioned Agatha's condition to her sister, who mentioned it to the grocer's wife, who mentioned it to the parish clerk. Soon, quiet smiles followed Agatha through the market, a woman her age, long married, now showing signs of expectation. It was considered a matter of private amusement, but Agatha sensed the laughter carried unease. Beneath their politeness lay something closer to disbelief. Her digestion worsened. After certain meals, she experienced waves of nausea and a dull ache near her spine. Alfred suggested ginger tea, but she refused. One evening, as she prepared to undress, she caught her reflection in the mirror. Her abdomen seemed subtly distended, the skin beneath pale and drawn. She ran her fingers over it. The flesh was warm, tender, and beneath it, a faint shift, as if something had turned in slow deliberation. Alfred's patience thinned as her complaints increased. He avoided conversation over meals, evading her gaze at night. When she spoke of movement, he accused her of imagining things. "You've been reading too much from those pamphlets," he said. "Women fill their heads with nonsense and call it illness." The following week, she felt it again, stronger this time, a rolling pressure beneath the right side of her ribs. That night, without speaking, Alfred reached across the bed and placed his hand against her abdomen. Perhaps to reassure her, perhaps to quell her fears. For a moment, there was only stillness. Then, beneath his palm, something moved, not a tremor or spasm, but a slow, purposeful contraction, like muscle drawing inward around a living form. He pulled his hand away sharply. Neither spoke. The lamp flickered against the wall, while outside the wind rattled the wooden shutters. Agatha turned on her side, facing away, her eyes open. The movement came again, subtle, measured, and patient, as though whatever lived inside her had begun to learn her rhythm. Beneath the thin skin of her ribs, a small shadow of motion became faintly visible, the first undeniable sign. The physician arrived from Lymington in the late afternoon. A cautious man named Dr. Edwin Gresham, who carried his practice in a black leather case and his skepticism in equal measure. Word had reached him that a woman in Bolio village was experiencing fetal movement inconsistent with her term. He came less out of concern and more out of curiosity, as he had recently read of new continental experiments in acoustic diagnosis, a method whereby sound could be used to observe motion within the human body. The Alfred cottage was small and dimly lit. Agatha sat upright in a wooden chair near the window, pale and composed, hands folded over the swelling at her waist. Her husband hovered in the doorway. Visibly uneasy, Dr. Gresham introduced himself briskly and began unpacking a curious device, a narrow brass tube fitted with a diaphragm and a hollow earpiece. He explained that the Doppler principle, named after the Austrian physicist who proposed it decades earlier, allowed detection of motion through frequency shifts in sound. If applied to the human body, it could, he claimed, differentiate the pulse of a child from the motion of the mother's blood. Agatha nodded faintly, uncomprehending, and lay back as instructed. The doctor pressed the cool end of the instrument to her abdomen. The room was quiet except for the faint ticking of the clock above the hearth. For a long while, he listened. At first, he heard only the familiar sounds, the hollow rush of circulation, the steady murmur of respiration. But beneath them came another sound, a faint, irregular friction, a movement with purpose that paused and resumed, as if something soft were gliding through enclosed space. He adjusted the instrument and listened again. The sound changed position. It did not echo from one side to the other as an infant's motion might. It traveled horizontally and low, almost serpentine. Agatha spoke quietly. "Do you hear it?" Her voice was thin, almost apologetic. "Yes," the doctor replied, though his tone lacked conviction. "It may be gas entrapment, intestinal motility, nothing more." He shifted the tube upward toward her ribs. The sound followed. He frowned. The movement seemed to react. Each time Agatha inhaled or murmured a word, there was a faint increase in activity beneath. The frequency rose slightly, then fell silent when she stopped speaking. He withdrew the device, rubbed the brass end with his handkerchief, and checked the clock. At 5:43 p.m., he resumed, this time recording notes in his ledger with deliberate precision. Pulse 78 BPM, respiration calm, frequency irregular, not cardiac, movement resembles crawling pattern, possibly parasitic, unconfirmed. Subject responsive, not fearful. When he pressed the instrument again, Agatha had begun humming softly, a nervous habit, the tune formless. The doctor froze through the tube. He heard it, a distinct shift. Something inside her body moved closer to the surface, following the resonance of her voice as if drawn to the sound. He abruptly pulled the device away. The hum ceased. The motion stopped. The silence that followed was long and heavy. The doctor cleared his throat, closed the ledger, and returned the apparatus to its case. His expression had altered, not fearful, but disturbed by the inadequacy of his own explanations. Alfred stepped forward. "Well, what is it, doctor? Is it alive?" Dr. Gresham hesitated, glancing once at Agatha and then at the floor. "The body does strange things under strain," he said finally. "It may correct itself." He gathered his things without another word and left, the sound of his boots fading down the road until there was nothing but the soft rustle of leaves outside. Agatha looked toward the doorway long after he had gone. The late sunlight slanted across the table, touching the brass stethoscope he had forgotten to take. It glimmered faintly, and from within her she felt a small, deliberate movement, timed perfectly with the fading echo of his departure. By October, the Alfred household had changed in rhythm and appetite. Agatha's hunger had become a defining feature of her days, mechanical, persistent, and wholly unsatisfying. She began her mornings with bread still warm from the hearth, consuming slice after slice until the loaf was gone. By noon she required more. In the records that survive, Alfred noted his astonishment. "She eats 14 loaves a day, 3 times over, and still claims hunger." The transformation occurred gradually but with visible consequence. Agatha's frame expanded, not with softness but with pressure, as if her body were stretching to accommodate some internal demand. Her corsets no longer fastened. The dresses she had worn the previous spring hung open at the seams. Despite her growing size, her skin remained pale, almost translucent. Her eyes sank deeper into their sockets, shadowed by sleeplessness and strain. At first, the village pitied her. "She's carrying late," they said. "An older mother must eat for 2, but as the weeks wore on, sympathy gave way to suspicion. Victorian modesty allowed illness to be spoken of, but appetite. For a woman to eat beyond restraint was a moral failing, a lapse in self-control unbefitting of a wife. The grocer's wife began to limit her purchases. The baker's boy whispered to others that Mrs. Alfred ate like a man gone starving. Exhausted and uncertain, Alfred tried reason. He hid portions, replaced bread with boiled potatoes, diluted milk with water. None of it mattered. Agatha would rise in the middle of the night to search for food, her steps light but deliberate, the house creaking as she moved through it. The following mornings, he would find crumbs scattered across the table and the faint impression of her hand pressed into the dough she'd torn apart. Each meal brought both relief and dread. After she ate, the motion within her abdomen became stronger, not violent, but organized, as if whatever resided there had learned to expect nourishment. She began pressing her hands to her stomach after meals, whispering softly that it settles when fed. The villagers, overhearing through open windows, carried tales of her madness through the parish. One evening, as Alfred sat across from her while she ate, he watched silently. He noticed she did not chew as someone starving, but performed her duty: bite, swallow, breathe, repeat. The rhythm was mechanical, devoid of pleasure. Between bites, her throat occasionally convulsed lightly, as if something within her were trying to break free. Alfred couldn't shake the growing dread that something was profoundly wrong. He glanced at her increasingly distended abdomen, the pallor of her skin, and the wild look in her eyes that seemed to haunt their home more than any ghost. As autumn deepened, whispers gained momentum. The more Agatha ate, the greater the urban legends became. Some say she's possessed. Others claim she invites strange spirits with her appetite, and hunger that has hardened into ravenous need. Meanwhile, inside Agatha, the creature thrived.